Brothers, if you've spent any time in the military, you've probably heard the phrase, embrace the suck. It's one of those sayings that gets repeated so often that most people stop thinking about what it really means. At first glance, it sounds like a lesson in stoicism. The weather is bad, the ruck is heavy, you're cold, wet, tired, so stop complaining and get on with it. And certainly there is some truth in that. But I don't think that's what the experienced men are really talking about. The older I get, the more it becomes clear to me that embrace the suck means something else entirely. It means embracing transformation. The rain isn't the point, the cold, the hunger, the exhaustion isn't the point. The point is the man those things are creating. Every veteran has experienced this at least once. You're tired, cold, hungry, miserable. The miles keep coming, the discomfort keeps coming, and then something changes. You stop focusing on the suffering. You start focusing on what the suffering is doing to you. You begin to understand that every step, every hardship, every obstacle is shaping you into something stronger than the man who started the journey. And in that moment, something unexpected happens. You find yourself taking pride in the experience. Not because it feels good, it certainly doesn't, and not because you're trying to prove how tough you are, but because you can see the transformation taking place. You're paying the price, and the process is working. The mountain is changing you. The ordeal is changing you. The hardship is changing you. You are becoming. And that realization leads us directly to the subject of today's discussion, the activated man. The activated man is the man who understands this process. He has crossed thresholds. He has entered liminal spaces. He has experienced transformation firsthand. But more importantly, he understands how it happened. He understands that growth often lives on the other side of fear. He understands that the man who enters the ordeal is rarely the same man who emerges from it. And because he understands this, he begins seeking transformation deliberately. Not for applause, not for recognition, not for status, but for growth. He climbs mountains because mountains change him. He accepts responsibility because responsibility changes him. He pursues difficult goals because difficult goals change him. The activated man is not a man who simply suffers. He is a man who understands what suffering can produce. And once a man understands that, he never looks at difficulty the same way again. The higher walls become, the greater the consequences become. A 16-year-old can make mistakes and recover. A 20-year-old can make mistakes and recover. Someone can pick him up. Someone can help him. Someone can show him the way. But eventually, the walls become much taller. The gap between them grows, and so does the difficulty of the jump. A husband and father can make mistakes. A business owner, a platoon sergeant, a community leader can make mistakes. But the consequences become much more severe. The fall becomes more expensive. The stakes become higher. The rescue becomes less likely. At some point, every man reaches a wall where he realizes something. If I fall from here, other people fall with me. My wife falls with me, my children, my business, My soldiers fall with me. My community falls with me. The higher you climb, the more responsibility you carry, because responsibility is heavy, and heavy is the crown. This is why the higher walls are so dangerous, not because they are taller, but because there's more at stake, because more people are depending on you, because the consequence of failure continues to grow. And yet, this is precisely why the activated man keeps climbing, because he understands that growth and responsibility are inseparable. The man capable of carrying greater burdens is the man capable of climbing higher walls. I'm sure you've noticed, but there is something missing from modern life. The hero. Not the superhero, not the action movie character. The hero. The part of the young boy that looks at a mountain and wants to climb it. The part that sees a wall and wants to know what is on the other side. The part that sees danger and adventure and challenge and feels drawn toward it. Every boy is born with some measure of this impulse. You can see it when they are young. They want to explore, they want to build, they want to test themselves, they want to become. But somewhere along the way, many of them are taught a different lesson. They are told, be realistic, lower your expectations, play it safe, avoid risk, avoid failure, avoid discomfort, avoid uncertainty, conform. And eventually, many young men begin to internalize these lessons. The wall stops looking like an opportunity, and it starts looking like a threat. The mountain stops looking like an adventure, and it starts looking like unnecessary risk. The ordeal stops looking like transformation, and it starts looking like suffering to be avoided. And then, we act surprised when so many men refuse to climb. We act surprised when they refuse responsibility, refuse leadership, when they hesitate before difficult decisions. But why wouldn't they? For years, they were taught that safety was the highest virtue, that comfort and security were the highest virtues. And then one day, we asked them to become heroes. And in this moment, we realized the hard truth. And that truth is that heroes are not created by comfort. They are created by challenge, by responsibility, by sacrifice, through transformation. Because a society that forgets how to cultivate heroes should not be surprised when it eventually finds itself running short of them. And that is exactly our collective problem right now, isn't it? We need our heroes. At this point, we need to stop and ask an important question. Why? Why cross the wall? Why enter the liminal space? Why willingly embrace the ordeal? Why pursue transformation at all? Throughout this series, we've discussed the wall, the threshold between innocence and experience, the liminal space, the place where the old self dies and the new self emerges. We have discussed altered states, moments where action replaces hesitation. We have discussed the ordeal, the challenge, the hardship, the sacrifice, and we have discussed the transformation that follows. But why? What was all of that for? Because transformation is not the goal. Transformation is preparation. Preparation for greater responsibilities. Preparation for heavier burdens. Service, leadership, sacrifice. Preparation for heroism. A tribe does not initiate boys because it enjoys rituals. A tribe does not create ordeals because it enjoys suffering. A tribe does not send young men into the wilderness because hardship is entertaining. A tribe does these things because one day those boys will become the men responsible for carrying the tribe forward. One day they will become fathers. One day they will become husbands. They will become leaders. They will become protectors. One day they will become the men standing between chaos and the people they love. And when that day arrives, the tribe cannot afford uncertainty. It cannot afford hesitation. It cannot afford weakness of character. The purpose of initiation has always been the same: to prepare ordinary men for extraordinary responsibilities. Not because every man will become famous, not because every man will become powerful, but because every civilization depends upon men who are willing to carry burdens that others cannot. Transformation is not the destination. Transformation is the forge. The destination is responsibility. Now, we return to Odin, not to revisit what we've already discussed, but to take the next step. Throughout this series, Odin has represented transformation, the crossing of thresholds, the pursuit of wisdom, the willingness to sacrifice in exchange for growth, the journey itself. But transformation is never an end unto itself. Transformation produces something. Growth produces something. Initiation produces something. And this is where the father becomes important. Because Odin is not only the wanderer, not only the seeker, the sacrifice, he is also a father. And fathers produce sons. The purpose of the father is not fatherhood itself. The purpose of the father is what comes after. Likewise, the purpose of transformation is not the transformation itself. The purpose of initiation, the purpose of growth is not growth itself. These things exist to create something, to produce something, to bring something into the world that did not exist before. And if Odin represents transformation, if Odin represents initiation, represents the process, then the question naturally becomes, what does that process create? And now, we arrive at Thor. I will admit something before we begin. I do not speak about Thor very often. Not because I dislike the subject, quite the opposite. I rarely speak about him because I'm not entirely certain I can do the idea justice. Throughout this series, I have spoken comfortably about Odin, transformation, initiation, thresholds, all of it. These are things I understand. These are things I have experienced. But Thor represents something different. Thor represents the outcome, the result, the thing that transformation was attempting to create all along. And this is where I believe the relationship between Odin and Thor becomes important. Not merely as mythological figures, but as a model, a father and son, a process and a product, an initiator and a hero. Throughout this series, Odin has represented transformation, the willingness to leave one state behind and enter another, the climb itself. But transformation does not exist for its own sake. The Father exists to produce the Son. Initiation exists to produce the hero. And that is why Thor is the son of Odin. Odin is the process. Thor is the product. Odin is the transformation. Thor is what the transformation creates. Wisdom producing strength. Initiation producing heroes. The tribe produces the burden bearer. The boy crosses the wall. The man enters the liminal space. The hero emerges. And perhaps the clearest way to understand this difference is this. There is an old question that appears throughout history. Who will go? Who will answer the call? Who will stand between chaos and what is worth protecting? To some men, this sounds like a choice. To the heroic man, it does not. He goes because, of course, he goes. Everything he has become points towards that answer. Every burden he has carried, every wall he has climbed, every sacrifice he has made, every transformation he has endured. The answer was decided long ago. Not by command, not by obligation, by character. The heroic man stands between chaos and the people he loves because he cannot imagine doing otherwise. And that, in my view, is Thor. Not merely strength, not merely power, but strength placed in service to something greater than itself. The protector, the provider, the builder, the defender, the burden bearer, the man who goes, the warrior. At this point, it's important to clarify something. The activated man and the heroic man are not really the same thing, so to speak. At least not from the perspective of the man himself. The heroic man is the man others depend on, the protector, the burden bearer, the man who answers the call, the man who moves toward the problem, the man who remains standing when others cannot, the man who accepts responsibility voluntarily. But there is a danger here. A man may begin to believe he has arrived. He may believe he has paid his dues. He may begin to believe that he has reached the summit. He may begin to believe that the journey is complete. This is where growth ends. Because the moment a man believes he has become the heroic man, he stops climbing. He accepts a static identity. He accepts a static role. He begins living on yesterday's accomplishments. The activated man understands something different. The summit is never the summit. The wall is never the final wall. The mountain is never the final mountain. Every summit will reveal another summit. Every wall conceals another wall. Every responsibility prepares him for greater responsibility. The activated man does not see himself as the heroic man. The activated man sees another climb, another burden, another opportunity for growth. This is why heroism is often viewed from below. The young man sees his older brother. The wrestler sees the champion sees the master sees the elder, and the elder sees another summit hidden in the clouds. The people below the mountain see the hero. The man climbing the mountain sees the next ascent. That is the difference. The heroic man is a perspective. The activated man is a process. One is how others see him. The other is how he sees himself. And that distinction matters, because the moment a man stops growing, he begins declining. The moment he stops climbing, gravity takes over. The moment he believes he has arrived, the transformation ends. The activated man understands this, which is why he never truly arrives. He climbs until the day he dies. One of the great tragedies of the modern world is not that men have become incapable. It is that so many men never discover what they are capable of. I do not believe we suffer from a shortage of talent. I do not believe we suffer from a shortage of intelligence. We do not suffer from a shortage of courage. I think we suffer from a shortage of initiation. For most of human history, young men were pointed toward the wall. They were expected to climb, expected to struggle, to transform, to grow into greater responsibilities. The journey was not always easy, but at least the journey was visible. Today, many young men never even see the path. Nobody points towards the wall. Nobody explains the purpose of the climb. Nobody explains that difficulty is often the mechanism of growth. Nobody explains that heroism is not reserved for extraordinary people. It is expected of ordinary men. And so many remain suspended between potential and fulfillment, capable of more, but never discovering it, capable of carrying greater burdens, but never being asked to carry them, capable of climbing higher walls, but never being shown that the wall exists. This is the modern problem. Not that men have lost the capacity for greatness, but that many never encounter the process that would reveal it. At this point, I want to shift metaphors for a moment. Throughout this series, I have used the image of the wall, mostly because that is how I have always envisioned it. A series of walls, one after another, each one requiring a more difficult climb, each one revealing another beyond it. But there is another metaphor our ancestors returned to again and again: the mountain. And there is reason for that. When human beings imagine the divine, they almost instinctively place it above themselves. On a mountaintop, at the end of an ascent, at the end of an ordeal. The Greeks placed their gods upon Olympus. The Norse placed Valhalla high above Midgard on a mountain in Asgard. Again and again we encounter the same idea. Something valuable exists above us, and reaching it requires effort, requires sacrifice, requires ascent. I do not think this is an accident. I think our ancestors understood something profound. Growth is uphill. Transformation is uphill. Responsibility is uphill. The wall creates the hero. The mountain reveals the hero. When I look back on my own life, the first day I walked into a wrestling room, I naively thought I was crossing a finishing line. But I wanted to become something, someone. Looking back, I realized I was standing at the base of a mountain. The first wall mattered, it changed me. But it was only the beginning. Because the hero is not made in a moment. The hero is forged through decades, one responsibility after another, one sacrifice after another, one climb after another. And this is why the activated man never believes he has arrived. Every summit reveals another summit. Every answer reveals another question. The climb continues. Always. At this point, we need to talk about the Einherjar. I think they're often misunderstood. The Einherjar are not gods. They are not Thor. They certainly are not perfection. They are not men who've arrived. They are men who never stopped climbing. This is what makes them special. Not that they crossed the wall. Many men have crossed the wall. Not that they've climbed a mountain. Many men have climbed mountains. The Einherjar are the men who refused to stop. The men who refused to become comfortable. The men who refused to rest upon yesterday's accomplishments. The men who made excellence a habit. The men who made growth a way of life. The first among men. Not because they claimed superiority, they certainly are, but because they embraced responsibility. They embraced sacrifice, transformation, again and again and again. And this is where I think one of the greatest lessons of special operations becomes relevant. There is a saying, selection is an ongoing event. At first glance, that sounds like a statement about assessment and qualification, but it is something much deeper than that. It is a statement about life. It means there is no arrival, no final summit, no permanent victory, no moment where a man can point to yesterday's accomplishments and say, "I have done enough." The climb continues. This is the difference between the activated man and the man who has become static. The static man reaches a summit and builds a house. The activated man reaches a summit and looks for the next ascent. And I suspect this is why Odin chose the Einherjar. Not because they are flawless, not because they are divine, but because they understand the process. They understand that growth never ends. They understand that responsibility never ends. They understand that becoming never ends. These are the men you want beside you when the final battle arrives. Not because they are guaranteed victory, but because they will never stop climbing. They will never stop adapting. The Einherjar are not the men who reached the summit. They are the men who discovered that the summit was never the point. The climb was. And if we think about this tactically for a moment, the choice of the Einherjar suddenly makes perfect sense. Ragnarok might not arrive for another 1,000 years, perhaps longer. If every man in Midgard crossed the wall, if every man entered the liminal space, if every man became initiated, it would still be the Einherjar that Odin would choose. Why? Because they are the men who have already proven who they are. The men who never accepted yesterday's accomplishment as sufficient for today's challenges. Think about what that means. Give such a man another 1,000 years, another 1,000 years to learn, another 1,000 years to train, another 1,000 years to grow stronger, faster, wiser, more capable, more disciplined, more dangerous, more effective. Who would Harald Hardrada be if he had another 1,000 years? Who would the greatest warriors, leaders, explorers, builders, and kings become if given a millennium more to develop themselves? The answer is almost difficult to comprehend, and that is precisely the point. The Einherjar are not selected because of what they've accomplished. They are selected because of who they became. They demonstrated in Midgard that growth was part of their nature, that becoming was part of their nature, that excellence was part of their nature. And if that was true in life, why would it stop in death? Because, of course, they would continue climbing, of course they would continue improving, and of course they would continue preparing. Because that is what they have always done. Viewed from that perspective, Odin's choice becomes obvious. If a final battle is coming, those are exactly the men you would want standing beside you. I mentioned before that Soft likes to say selection is an ongoing event. Most people hear that phrase and think it refers to assessment, qualification, evaluation. They are mistaken. It refers to life. The wall is not the end. The liminal space is not the end. The summit is not the end. This is the lesson of the activated man. This is the lesson of the heroic man. This is the lesson of the Einherjar. Because every day the activated man voluntarily chooses to engage in combat with entropy. Every day he chooses growth over stagnation, responsibility over comfort, ascent over decline. Not because someone commands him to, not because someone is watching, not because he seeks recognition, but because he understands that all things left unattended begin to decay. Strength decays, knowledge decays, skill decays, communities decay, civilizations decay, men decay. The activated man understands that becoming is not the destination, it is a process that must be renewed every day. The moment a man believes he has arrived, he has stopped growing. The moment he stops growing, he begins declining. The moment he rests upon yesterday, he becomes less than he could have been. There is no final wall. There is no final summit, no final transformation. There is only the next challenge, the next responsibility, the next burden, the next opportunity to become. Selection is an ongoing event, not because someone is judging you, because life is. Every day asks the same question: who are you becoming? And every day your actions provide the answer. Eventually, every man encounters a reality he cannot escape. Age. The mountain remains, the climb, the responsibility remain, but the man begins to change. The eyes grow weaker, the body slows. Old injuries begin collecting their debts. The things that were once easy become difficult, and eventually every man must ask himself a question: how do I continue climbing? How do I continue pursuing excellence? How do I continue moving toward the summit when I am no longer the young man I once was? Well, the answer is not surrender. Once again, the answer is transformation. The warrior becomes the general. The boxer becomes the coach. The mission remains the same. The method changes. I think one of the mistakes of modernity is waiting too long to become the elder. There comes a point, perhaps around 50 years old, where a man should begin turning around and reaching back. Not because he has finished climbing, but because he has learned enough to help others climb. Importantly, he is still close enough to the fight to understand it. He can still walk the mountains, still share the burden, still stand beside the younger men. But now, he can also explain the terrain. He can point toward dangers. He can identify the traps. He can teach lessons that cost him decades to learn. This is how continuity is maintained. This is how tribes survive. This is how wisdom endures. The elder's purpose is not to defeat the young champion. The elder's purpose is to create him, to prepare him, to sharpen him, to help him become more than he could have become alone. And this is how the activated man continues climbing even into old age. The climb does not end. The mountain does not disappear, and the burden does not vanish. The form simply changes. The young man climbs by testing himself. The elder climbs by developing others. The young man builds strength within himself. The elder builds strength within the tribe. The young man carries the burden. The elder teaches others how to carry it. The boxer becomes the coach, and if he does his job well, one day he will watch his son climb higher than he ever could, as the completion of his life's work. Because the purpose of the elder is not to remain the champion forever. The purpose of the elder is to ensure that champions continue to exist long after he is gone. Throughout this series, I have done my best to describe the wall, the liminal space, the ordeal, the transformation, the mountain, the climb, the activated man, the heroic man, the Einherjar. I have pointed towards these things as clearly as I know how, at least for now. But before we part ways, there is something important you should also understand. I have not told you everything, and I cannot. Young men often demand certainty. They want all the answers. They want to know exactly what waits on the other side of the wall before they commit themselves to climbing it. They want guarantees, proof, certainty, but that's not how this works. The gift, this gift, remains wrapped. Not because anyone is trying to deceive you, not because anyone is trying to withhold something from you, because part of the gift is opening it yourself. Part of the gift is discovery. Part of the gift is becoming. You can shake the box, you can weigh it, you can examine it from every angle. You can listen to the stories of men who open theirs, but eventually there comes a moment when you must open it yourself. There are truths that cannot be transferred, only experienced. I can describe the mountain, but I cannot make you climb. I can show you the way, but I cannot make you accept the challenge. I can point you toward the wall, but I cannot cross it for you. And even if I could, it would rob you of the very thing you seek. Because the reward is not waiting at the end of the journey. The reward is who you become because of it. The gift can be offered, but it must be opened by the recipient. The path can be shown, but it must be walked by the traveler. The burden can be explained, but it must be carried by the man himself. The wall is still there. The mountain is still there. The climb is still there. The question has never changed. Will you climb? But the purpose of initiation is not transformation. The purpose of initiation is to create heroic men. This is the Path of Kings. Until next time.